Revelers, this is Off the Rails, Right versus Left, the podcast that we do because we think the left is evil. I'm Rob B.
And I'm Brad Lee.
And I'm Brian G.
And we are Off the Rails, Right versus Left. Again, we're doing this show because we think everybody needs to know that the left is evil.
All right. Well, welcome, Revelers. Got kind of a special issue today with the election coming up. All the races pretty much come down to the Republicans and the Democrats. And I'm personally a libertarian. You guys know this. You've heard me and Brad go on and on about it during the show. And I'm actually happy that as I'm going through and I'm interviewing some of the alternative candidates going into the election, the first person that I'm going to be interviewing is actually part of the Texas Senate race, the race that everybody else seems to think is just Ted Cruz and Colin Allred, but we also have a Libertarian candidate, Ted Brown. We have two confirmed write-in candidates, and Dr. Tracy Andrus and Annalisa Roche. And today we are actually going to be talking with Ted Brown. That's the Libertarian candidate for the Texas Senate seat. So, welcome aboard. How are you doing,
Rob.
Mr. Brown?
Very good, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Again, I'm a libertarian, so it comes with a lot of misunderstanding about what a libertarian is because it's too close to the word liberal. For some reason, people don't pluck liberty out of that; they pluck liberal out of it. So, what would you say is the best short line to describe the Libertarian Party?
Well, the short line is that a libertarian believes that you have the right to live your life however you see fit, as long as you're not harming anyone else, and as long as you take responsibility for your own actions. And basically, the other parties, the other ideologies have the exact point of view. They have a plan to run your life. They don't care whether you're minding your own business or just doing your own thing. They say, no, the Democrats have their plan for you. The Republicans have their plan for you. They're different plans usually, but the point is though that they think they know better. Well, I believe that each individual knows better how to run his life, and that's the reason why we need an alternative party where we default to allowing people their personal freedom or recognizing their right to their personal freedom and not having all this government across the board. And the government's grown far too large, as you know, at the federal, state, and local level. So I'm here to oppose as much government as I can while defending individual rights.
Yeah, I think really it breaks down to you go back all the way to the preamble of the Constitution, and it's very specific in the role of government, which is basically protect the people and just promote general welfare, but they're not responsible for providing for the general welfare of each individual person.
That's correct. Yeah. In fact, President Grover Cleveland said that when he vetoed a bill to provide seed relief to farmers. He said that while it's the duty of the people to support their government, it's not the duty of the government to support the people. And that's pretty much true. I mean, and the people should only support the government as long as it's not violating their rights. Even in the Declaration of Independence, it says that if the government becomes oppressive of your rights, you have the right to alter or to abolish it and to impose and to get a new government.
Now, and in a bit of irony, I hope I'm attributing the quote I believe it was Davy Crockett, which is funny because I live very near Crockett, Texas. But there was a natural disaster and the government wanted to appropriate funds to help with the disaster relief. And he said, well, it's not our money. It's easy to spend other people's money on stuff. But if it's not yours, you shouldn't be spending it. If you want to spend your money, go ahead, but I won't vote for it.
Right. And he took up a collection in Congress to pay that exact bill. He said that if each of us gave whatever the amount was, and he just couldn't raise it. They didn't want to pay, they didn't put their money where their mouth was, in other words.
Exactly. So, and I think that's kind of where our government has been stuck is whether you're talking about Republicans or Democrats, they go straight into how they can spend your money to fix your problems, like you're not capable of fixing your own.
Exactly. Yeah. They have the situation where they will just, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. They are just going to keep spending your money whether you want them to or not. And they're also, one of the problems right now is that they're spending money they don't even have. I mean, the budget deficits, they're spending $3 billion a day more than they even are taking in. And this is adding to the national debt, which is now $35 trillion, which, as you know, is totally unsustainable. And
absolutely.
They just print money out of thin air. In fact, they don't even print it anymore. They just do ledger entries over at the Federal Reserve, and they create all this money. And that's what causes inflation. I mean, nothing else, just the government putting too much money or just printing up money where it doesn't exist is what causes inflation. So people are suffering whenever the government thinks they can just pay for anything, pay for everything. You know, what hope is there when there's so many constituencies for all these government programs? once the government program gets started, as Ronald Reagan said, it's like perpetual life. You just can't get rid of a government program, but we really have to. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, we just can't do it unless we have massive cuts in the federal budget across the board. Every agency, every department, every program, without exception. We just can't afford the government that we have.
Okay, so if you were able to take the seat away from Ted Cruz, what legislation would you propose to address our flagging economy?
Yeah.
Well, before you answer the question,
Yeah.
I want to preface it like this, because the government under the hands of the career bureaucrats tries to say that our economy is doing well.
Mhm.
So I have the example: if you sell $100 million worth of cars
Mhm.
at 20,000 each, that's 5,000 cars. Okay, but if the price is inflated by 20%, that same $100 million worth of cars is only 4,000 cars.
Mhm.
So the problem with that is you now don't need to build. You now need 900 less cars built, so you need less people transporting, building, selling, financing. So it impacts downstream. But what we have going on in the economy is, because the inflation has been so far ahead of the GDP growth, it looks like our economy is growing, but like 2021, we had a 2% GDP growth and a 9% inflation, which means the economy, the real economy, actually contracted by 7%.
That sounds about right. I mean, the economy is not as good as they say, but I mean, some people are doing just fine. I mean, the stock market's at a record high, which is kind of funny because the business indicators don't really show that it should be at a record high. But again, it's
But I,
almost it's like
but again,
gambling.
I would push back on the stock market being at record highs. Your currency is inflated by 30% under Biden. That
Mhm.
means that 42,000 number for the Dow
Yeah.
Jones is actually closer to 32, 33, which is
Um,
actually a very low number. You got to remember, the money that's in the stock market isn't worth as much.
that's true. I don't remember what it was like before all the inflation started, to see if that's kept up with that inflation rate that way, or
No,
whether
it
it's
hasn't.
better
It
behind. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the stock market's up something like 8%, 9%, something like that.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the inflation rate, if you go across all metrics and not just ones they pick and choose because it's not quite as bad,
Right.
you're looking at nearly 20 to 30% inflation. And then if you look at stuff like building supplies, having built my house
Mhm.
since Biden came in, you're talking 100% inflation, and that's not the only field where it's there.
Oh yeah, and it's so funny. I think they started really manipulating the inflation rates back during the Obama administration, is when they started like deciding just what items they're going to include in the inflation rate, and that's it's continued now. Like depending on if the prices are going up, they kind of take it out. Like if it's like energy, or if it's like forget all of them, but they took out certain ones, and then when they see that like electronics are dropping in price, like TVs and all, they throw those in there to show, oh, that counterbalances that the other items are going up, and it looks like a
Exactly.
lower inflation rate. The same as they fudge the unemployment rates too. There's a lot of people just giving up on finding a job, and they're no longer included in these somewhat low unemployment rates that
Well,
are.
yeah. So the unemployment number, if people don't realize, that only counts people that are like filing for receiving
Mhm.
unemployment, and you can only receive unemployment for a year. So if you've been out of a job for over a year and you can't find a new job because the economy's trash, you don't count an unemployment number anymore.
No, you don't. Then they often apply for disability for that reason, because they can't get money anywhere else, and they're trying to like create a disability where one doesn't exist, and sort of making those funds not available to people who are actually disabled. So, yeah,
Okay.
that's another
So
problem.
as a member of Congress, what legislation would you want to put forward to fix the problem?
Oh, now see, that's one of the problems, being the would be being one of the only libertarians. I'd have to follow what President Calvin Coolidge said, where he said it's much more important to stop a bad bill from being passed than to get a good bill passed, because a bad bill can really wreck things in the country. And that's what so much of what Congress does. Just about everything they do is wrecking the economy, wrecking our foreign policy, wrecking people's personal lives. And so, just standing there and trying to stop these bills from passing is probably going to be the main thing I would do. They say, "Do I have unanimous consent for this bill?" Well, heck no, you don't have unanimous consent for this bill. And usually Rand Paul of Kentucky, a Republican senator from Kentucky, is the only one that does that, saying that he objects to the bill. So he needs some help, and I'll certainly be asking him for advice about how to do that. But interestingly, individual senators have a lot of power to put like a monkey wrench in the system, which really surprises me that they allow that. Like, for example, Senator Tommy Tuberville was holding up military promotions for many, many months until he got what he wanted. And I thought immediately, well, how can A, one guy hold up the military promotions, and B, why does the Senate approve military promotions in the first place? The whole thing didn't make sense. But the important part was one senator could hold that up. And that's the case too. They can put holds on legislation for a certain amount of time. They can, for example, here in Texas, I could say, well, no, I don't want that person appointed a U.S. attorney or a federal judge because I'm the Texas senator and I have a say in that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that a senator can do, unlike a House member, to put a monkey wrench in the system. And I would probably be doing a lot of that, just trying to stop these guys from violating people's rights. My mantra would be, if the bill promotes liberty, I'll vote for it. And if it's in opposition to liberty, I'll vote against it. So the odds are I'll be voting against just about all the legislation. Now, that doesn't mean
and I hope from an economic standpoint that includes if it increases spending or debt.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Though, obviously, if I'll vote in favor of tax cuts, though, of any kind that those might be.
Well, but at this point, with our current deficit, any tax cut needs to be paired with spending cuts. And considering the fact we have 12 cabinet departments, but we have over 5,000 government agencies, there's plenty of stuff that we can get rid of. And the majority of that is duplicate over departments that already exist on the state level, and the federal government has no business being involved because we are a republic of semi-autonomous states, and the states need to be allowed to do their job without the government getting involved when they don't know what's going on in the state.
Right, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
The one pushback that I would make on your strategy, and it's the same thing that I would have pushed back with Calvin Coolidge if I was much, much, much older, is even if you're the only libertarian, you can propose bills and refuse to play ball on anything else until your bill at least gets debated on the floor.
Oh, that's absolutely true. And there's a number of subjects, like, for example, where I know that the libertarian position, my position, is actually what the public wants, and they're just not getting it in Washington. And that's like, for example, the total decriminalization of marijuana at the federal level, for example.
We'll get to that in a minute. So
that's an example, though. That's an example, though, where I am any libertarian in office would be on the pulse of America, unlike what the Democrats and Republicans are doing, because when politicians have power, and the ultimate power over people is to be able to lock them up in prison, they just don't want to give that up.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So kind of bleeding into this is probably one of the fastest rising cost segments of the economy, and that's healthcare.
Yes.
So, as a libertarian, what do you think we need to do to address healthcare? Because I think I know the perfect solution, but I wonder what you think.
Well, first of all, the government should be less involved in healthcare than they are now. And most of the proposals that you hear are the government's going to become more involved in healthcare, like the all the way up to having like a national health service like Britain or Canada does, which would be a disaster, and or Medicare for all, which to the person just hearing that and not knowing what the economic implications are, that sounds like a good idea, but it's not. And basically, so much of medical care and so much of the costs are just in compliance costs. I mean, a lot of doctors are spending more time just filling out forms than they are treating patients. And a lot of them are quitting because of that. They just can't put up with it. So we need to have less bureaucracy, of course. And we probably need more doctors, too, for that matter. There's the law of supply and demand, but the supply isn't there. There's a legal limitation in most states about how many people can be admitted to medical schools. So there's a limitation on how many people can become a doctor. I'm not sure if there's a limitation on how many can become a nurse. Also, any licensing of doctors should be reciprocal over all the states, so they can go anywhere. Same with doctors and nurses. Foreign doctors are not allowed to practice here, even though they might have gone to the best medical school in Slovakia or something. They still aren't allowed to practice medicine. They should be able to after just perhaps taking a little exam or something. Same with bringing in other healthcare professionals and all, like so many people from the Philippines are involved in nursing and all. This should be quite easy for them to come.
Absolutely. My soon-to-be wife is an overnight nurse, and like half of her team at her hospital is Filipino.
Right. So they need to be welcomed because I know with the doctors, like a friend I knew many years ago, an Iraqi refugee after the Iraq War, and he was an MD from Iraq, but he couldn't prove that he was a doctor because Saddam Hussein had held his medical diploma because they didn't want people leaving the country. So
Yeah. So
but all the MDs, yeah.
I would agree with the fast tracking of doctors being able to come here from other parts because if they're
Yeah.
skilled people, I would throw the caveat on there. I've been to 70 countries myself, and I
Yeah.
will say that the medical training is not the same in other countries because in
hmm
most countries the way they train their doctors is to focus on the most likely things that they're going to see there, so they can
hmm
hurry up and get them into the field. That's why across most of the countries in Africa, you got a 2 to 4 year program to become a doctor, whereas in the US, it's anywhere from 8 to 12.
Right. Right. I
So,
understand that. And then
uh,
other ways of relieving some cost to people in more medical savings accounts where people can save tax free for their health care, ability to buy drugs from other countries, ability to get health insurance across state lines. There's just a lot of ways to save money on that, but there's a lot of limitations. Because there's also the big the health industry has a big lobby there in Washington too. Everybody does, and they give their contributions and want to make things, put more money in their pockets.
okay. Two other points I'd make on healthcare before we move on to court appointments and foreign
hmm
policy. I do want to add on to the point that I believe that probably one of the biggest issues is a need for massive tort reform.
Yeah.
The insurance for malpractice is almost 70% of the individual doctor's cost. That's why you don't really see independent doctors anymore. They're all with big
hmm
companies. And then the other aspect of that is the markets are limited in all these states, and the health costs get even higher in the smaller states because they have even smaller markets. We need to open up the markets nationwide so the insurance companies can compete and expand their pools because the bigger pool they have, the more they can mitigate the expenses and lower the costs. So those I think are two things that I don't
Sure.
hear any party talking about that would have the biggest impact. If you could just get the malpractice suits under control and reasonable, malpractice insurance would come down. I think you'd see anywhere from a 20 to 30% decrease in medical expenses right off the top.
Well, that certainly could be, and I agree with you that they should have like a national insurance pool on that. If the insurance companies
Yeah.
believe that would work, and they probably would, because again, they want to expand their pools as well if possible, policyholders. But there's a lot of other laws that also limit doctors. Doctors don't want to stay in medicine either. Like for example, here in Texas now, a large chunk of the OBGYNs are worried about being accused of crimes if they give health care to women who are pregnant or having problems with their pregnancy. So there's a large chunk of them are talking about leaving the state or because they just don't feel that they're worried about whether they're going to go to jail or not if they provide health care. So, and that may be the case in other red states as well, where they have these really strict abortion laws. So that's another way. Are people going to be able to have babies? There's probably counties where there's no one to
Well,
deliver a
well,
baby.
we are going to touch on abortion in a minute too. So,
I'm
well,
just saying
actually,
that's
since
another
since
thing.
we're already here on abortion because that is
Sure.
in the top list, and it does kind of bleed out of healthcare. So,
hmm
with abortion, I find the point that you make on it, doctors wanting to or being concerned about providing healthcare, but then that
hmm
really comes down to how you quantify healthcare on abortion. So, um, I believe again the like I'm personally I'm a libertarian, but I'm also a pastor,
hmm
and the Bible clearly says God knew you before you were in the womb. To me, that's all I need to know it's a baby. But if you take it back from an abstract, okay, if the pro-life position is wrong, the woman has to suffer the consequences of the decision she made, about 15 of them that led to her being pregnant.
hmm
But if the pro-abortion side is wrong, they murdered a baby. So I think since the sole role of government is to protect people from other people, whether it's internally or externally, somebody has to protect that baby. So if you want to make a viability point, whether or not that's going to be a person, from a religious standpoint, I'm not going to agree with it, but it's an understandable from a medical standpoint. Okay. The twist on the abortion is there is not a single law in the country that prevents care for a woman who's in danger. So that's completely false. What you have is abortion doctors threatening to leave who call themselves OBGYNs that are abortion doctors that might want to leave because now you can't do abortions up to 36 weeks. Your client base is down and I can go over to California where I can stab him in the head coming out of the birth canal. Sorry, that's Minnesota where they do that. Tim Walls' area.
Okay. Well, you brought up a few issues on the abortion question. So basically, I do believe, I'm personally opposed to abortion myself, but I do believe in a woman's right to her reproductive freedom. I just don't like beginning between a doctor and a patient. I believe that's a private relationship between a doctor and a patient, and that the government has no role whatsoever to get in that.
Okay.
Role.
So
However,
can I counterpoint that with something real quick?
Yes.
Okay. The government shouldn't have any role in between a mother and their 3-year-old either, but the government's going to step in and say the mom can't kill a 3-year-old.
That part is true. That part is true.
So that to me is the government trying to abscond. We do have a responsibility to protect those that can't protect themselves. And what exemplifies that more than a baby?
Right. Well, I was going to move into the viability argument, because again, like 99% of abortions are in the probably before 15 weeks, and certainly in the first 2 trimesters before the baby it becomes from a fetus to a baby where it's viable outside the womb. So there are almost no abortions that are late-term abortions. If it comes to that point, that gets to the issue of the OBGYNs. If it gets to the point where you're getting into that long of a pregnancy, I think the woman wants to have the baby, but she's having complications. And she is forced to be in a situation where there's a problem with the fetus, there's a problem with her, where she needs to have the abortion. That's where we've come up with a few situations where, like in Texas, for example, you're right. The life of the mother is a reason to have an abortion, but they're worried about when to do that. Like she has to be like on the brink of death. It's not like if this goes on, she could.
That's not true. That's not true. The law states a reasonable, and that's what I'm saying. Like even this one with that, I think it was Teresa. Can't remember the name off the top of her head. The woman that went and had a chemical abortion and then she had sepsis. Okay,
that was the Georgia case, I think.
Yeah. So even the lawyers in that case are suing the hospital. They're not blaming it on the abortion law because the doctors failed to act. Okay, so doctors have a Hippocratic oath. They have oaths that they have to follow. First and foremost, do no harm. You can't kill a baby and say you're not doing harm. Okay, so and here's the issue for me. People approach it as reproductive rights. Women in this country have reproductive rights. They have the right to not have sex. They have a right to use 13 different kinds of birth control. After the fact, they still have the right to use the morning after pill. So at what point does your right to do what you want to do end? When it impacts another human being. Right. I can gather all the wealth I want, but I don't get to kill other people to get it.
Right. Well, what if you're talking about a patient who's like a 12 or 13-year-old who's been raped and maybe by a family member or something? It's very difficult to do any of those things to.
It's absolutely not difficult. It's absolutely not difficult. A 12 or 13-year-old biologically is not likely to have a safe pregnancy, and that would fall into the exceptions. Also, pretty much every state that has restrictive abortion has exceptions for rape and incest.
But doesn't seem like that's the case here in Texas. So it's so basically, I think we're just going to probably disagree on this issue. But again, I will say women's reproductive rights, and I do firmly believe that, and because sometimes women are pregnant because they don't choose to be pregnant. You're correct. I mean, they could choose not to have sex.
0.1% of abortions
don't have that choice. Yeah.
What percentage of abortions are because were from a circumstance of rape or incest?
That part I don't know, because those are often not reported, especially if they're
0.1%.
Things like that. Which is it?
0.1%. 0.1%.
I'm skeptical of that.
Okay, you can be skeptical. The data that's been collected is 0.1%, which means we're arguing for the 0.1%, that are exempted in most cases. However, 99.9% are retroactive birth control. So now, that being aside, what do you think the federal government's policy should be on abortion? Do you think that the returning of it to the states based on their decision when they overturned Roe v. Wade, saying that the Constitution doesn't address it, so the Constitution says it's the states?
Well, first of all, there should be no taxpayer-funded abortions, and that often comes from actually, both federal and state governments do that. So I'm certainly opposed to that because, again, like you, a lot of people consider it murder, and their tax dollars shouldn't be going to pay for it. But I do believe that, we're going to disagree on this too, but I do believe there should be a federal override of the state laws that are limiting abortion up to a certain point, not maybe 12 to 15 weeks, because I believe it's a civil rights issue, that women's rights are being violated, the equal protection of the laws, their civil liberties, and that's the time, similar to like civil rights laws, where I would override the state laws and protect the individual rights of the women to have their reproductive freedom.
So would you say Europe's pretty good about protecting women's reproductive rights?
Europe, I'm not sure. Some countries probably are.
Usually it's about 12 weeks.
Right. So I'm saying up to a point, not totally like it would be on the state level. I'm just saying up to a point, the feds need to protect that, because we're way below that, like 6 weeks in a number of states where women don't even know they're pregnant. Yeah.
I think 6 weeks is a little ridiculous. I think 12 weeks is a good place. But I don't think, again, it's not about what the federal governments or the bureaucrats or the politicians think they should do. The Constitution says that if it's not labeled as a power in the Constitution of the federal government, it rests with the states, which means you get the states deciding what's right for their state, and somebody in New York or somebody in Texas doesn't have a right to tell Wyoming or Georgia what their law should be if the Constitution did not say that it's a community law.
Right. Well, I see where you're getting with on that, and I agree with you that in general,
and that's the libertarian perspective, that the federal government shouldn't be taking more power than they should have. On the state level, I think you'd have an argument for your stance, but there's no constitutional backing for the federal government being involved. And we have 5,000 government agencies because the government gets involved in everything.
Oh, they certainly do. They certainly do.
Now, and I do challenge you to tell me one thing that the government's gotten involved in that got better. Right. So we'll move on. Supreme Court appointments. So what kind of justices would you be looking for the Supreme Court?
Justices that believe in, as I do, in personal freedom, economic freedom, and that will recognize strict constitutional limits on government. And frankly, the best justice right now, I think, is Neil Gorsuch. Seems to be the best justice now, because he's a quasi-libertarian, I would say. In fact, he even wrote a book recently about just how there's just too many laws. And I'm glad that he recognized that, because he's someone who really has cred on saying that, because he's a judge and a member of the Supreme Court. And there are far too many laws that can trip people up when there's no victims, there shouldn't be any crime. And he's recognized that. So he's very good on a lot of subjects. So
part of that's part of it, I think, is the trickiness in Congress, where they shove everything into a million different things into one bill, and there's no way for anybody to even know what the law is.
Oh yeah, exactly right. And that's like Nancy Pelosi saying, "We'll know what's in it when we pass it." I mean, could you think of a more ridiculous thing? I mean, that brings up another issue, like these bills, these 8,000-page bills that come before Congress. I mean, they don't give anybody a chance to review them and read through them for a few days and then propose amendments. It's like just the leadership says, take it or leave it. Well, I'm going to leave it. I mean, if there's a bill like that can't even be reviewed, that's an automatic no from me. And if they say this is a must-pass bill, no, that's a must-fail bill as far as I'm concerned, because that means somebody's trying to slip something in there to violate our rights. I mean, come on, we'll know what's in there if we pass the bill. I want to know what's in there before I pass the bill, and the odds are I'm not going to like what's in there. If everybody would love what's in there, they wouldn't have to hide it, right?
Right. So would you be personally, as a libertarian, I think we need a constitutional amendment that dictates that any bills coming out of Congress have to be clear to the average American, focused on a single topic, and concise.
Oh, exactly. In fact, there's been a let's see, what's it called? One law at a time, or something like that. One subject at a time law that's been proposed here and there by a number of members of Congress over the years. And there
Yeah,
certainly could
I
be.
think Congress forgets that the Congress when it was originally created was all people living real lives, being part-time,
Mhm.
and there were no career politicians.
Yeah, exactly. They have to live under those laws. But now it's just all a matter of they don't want like an ad run against them because they voted for Bill X. It sounds kind of controversial, and so they push it into this big bill where it's saying, oh well, I had to support that because I favored the farm program, continuing to provide farmers with seeds or whatever whatever they
You know
do
that
now.
that
Yeah.
that actually segues into another big topic, immigration, because they just had this immigration bill where Kamala Harris is out here saying it was the best bipartisan bill. Well, actually, 6 Democrats voted against it. That's the reason why it died. And the reason why they voted against it was because they said it was a border bill, but what it actually did was codified opening up the border, getting funding sanctuary cities, funding the transportation of illegal immigrants, um, getting more border agents to act as asylum processors, and absolutely nothing to control the flow of the border. So we obviously know what Trump wants to do, seal the border down. So where do you fall on the issue as a libertarian?
Well, from what you just mentioned, I just wanted to point out before I go into the immigration issue is the funding issue is what actually is what the Democrats love in a bill. No matter what the bill is, unless there's a lot of funding in there where they can spend a lot of tax dollars,
Oh,
they don't want the
I
bill to
for
pass. That's another subject matter, and
yeah,
that's why.
I forgot to mention only
Yeah,
$6 billion went for the border and 60 billion went for Ukraine in that bill. But I
right.
wanted to
That's
segue into immigration
right.
first.
So I'll talk about that now, but I just want you're right though. We ought to point that out that they'll just throw in everything to fund their favorite program in there. But on immigration, I think that there's been so many misstatements about immigration. Ted Cruz has been demonizing immigrants, and personally, I believe that immigrants are good for this country. I mean, they provide they're good for our economy, they're good for our society because we have a melting pot, unlike other countries where they might not fit in, like in some of the European countries. Here, people within a generation or two are part of our country. They fit in as part of the melting pot. And most people are here not to cause trouble or commit crimes or get on welfare. They're here to work and support their families and make a better life for themselves and their families. And I think they're getting a bum rap because they're all being accused of being criminals when they have a much lower, legal or illegal. All kinds of immigrants have a much lower crime rate than native-born Americans. In fact, I'd love to see what the MAGA crime rate is because there's a lot more of those guys than there are immigrants, and they probably commit plenty of crimes, but it's not put out that way. So,
Okay,
but I believe.
so I think, yeah, I think you have an interesting point there.
Mhm.
However, the study just came out that they let people into the country that were already convicted in crimes of their own country. 13,000 murder,
Mhm.
15,000 rapists, 425,000 for other serious crimes, and that's not counting petty civil offenses and fines.
Right. That actually goes back.
Okay.
The timeline on that was very deceptive. That's 50 years worth of immigrants, and not
Okay.
just the last 3 or 4 years.
So to your point about immigration being a plus for the country, absolutely. And we have immigration laws and we have a process that they have to follow.
Mhm.
Is there a reason why we should let people break those laws and then
Well,
reward them with status?
Well, first of all, it's almost impossible for most people to come here legally. And even those that have applied correctly, they go to the US Embassy in some other country and put in their application or whatever, their applications are being ignored by the millions. There's a backlog of about 10 years even answering their applications. So you can
So
see
we're
how
gonna
people.
add 12 million asylees that are trying to jump the line.
Well, see, that's the problem. They shouldn't really have to be asylum seekers. I believe anybody that wants to come here should come here, but they should become in an orderly fashion, like an Ellis Island style
Okay.
immigration system, like we used to have, where they would be checked out. They check in at any port of entry, not just trying to swim across the Rio Grande to some small Texas town. That's ridiculous.
So what
Yeah.
you're advocating is you're wanting to go to Congress, but you don't believe in the enforcement of laws that Congress passes.
Well, I'm just saying that the law should be different, obviously. And it's
Okay.
like a big jumbled mess right now. Not only has Congress not really passed an immigration law for decades, then the president, each time, whether it's Trump or Biden, whoever, just sort of makes things up as they go along and tries to
I
alter the
I
immigration laws.
He didn't alter the immigration laws. He began enforcing the immigration laws on the book.
Well, I was saying, like, for example, if a president wants more immigrants, like Obama, he sort of tweaked it to have more, and then Trump tweaked it the other way.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the exact wording is of
So
the
your
laws.
complaint your complaint was it's okay to break the law if it's inconvenient for you. So if it's inconvenient for me to work, then I should just be able to go steal.
Well, no. What I'm talking about is changing
Okay,
the law. And
but
I'm just saying what it
yeah,
should
you're
be.
no, but you're but okay, but they're already criminals. They're already here illegally.
Well, no, because being a refugee is actually allowed. I mean, we do
Yeah, but they
accept
don't have
refugees in this
refugee
country.
status, and the international standards on refugee status is that you apply at the first country that you come to that's safe, which doesn't apply to anybody that arrives at this country at all, unless they're coming from Canada, which I guess if you're a trucker up there, you have a legitimate right to claim asylum.
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
Cuba, some of the Caribbean nations have a right to claim asylum in this country. No other people from any other nation actually under international law have a right to claim asylum in the United States.
Well, I would say if you're using those terms, perhaps the Haitians going to San Juan, Puerto Rico, which they could get to very easily, would be able to do that to the
I
first
didn't
country they
debate
come to.
the
But
Haitians.
yeah.
So like, and even the big soundbite of they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats.
Oh,
I'm
ridiculous.
no. Before you start,
Yeah.
I'm going to give you some facts. 50% of the population of Haiti do practice voodoo. Part of voodoo is the practice of animal sacrifice, after which they do eat the sacrifice because it is sacrilegious to not.
Mhm.
Okay. So what is racist is people saying that it's not happening. This is a constitutionally protected right to practice their religion. There has been a Supreme Court case on it. It is in fact a fact. It's racist to come running to the defense of Haitians and say it's ridiculous, it's not happening, when it actually is part of their culture. What I think is disgusting is that our federal government brought in 500,000 people, which means 250,000 of them are going to be voodoo practitioners, which is fine. It's their constitutional right to be voodoo practitioners, yet they made no effort to scare animals for these people to practice their religion. So I do think that it's atrocious that they're being villainized for practicing their religion, but the situation was created because the government had an open nozzle bringing in more people than we could support their cultural assimilation in the United States.
Well,
But
I think
to make the issue that they're not eating dogs and cats, that's absolutely false. So if you're about to say that, I would refer you to documentaries. There's about 50 different documentaries and about 5,000 books on the topic of Haitian voodoo.
well, no, I wasn't going to say that. But what I was going to say is there's no evidence they stole people's pets.
Yes,
Out of
actually,
their,
there are hundreds of police reports about it. And when you choosing not to investigate a crime does not mean that there's no evidence of a crime.
well, they did find one person that ate somebody's pet, and that was a native-born American from a different city in Ohio than where than Springfield. And I mean,
Okay.
it's just the point is, though, I'm
I
not saying
get
that
your
they,
point. I get your point.
yeah.
But you cannot say the fact that you're not looking at evidence means there's no evidence. And that's something that we continue to do here. The facts are that the Haitian community does practice voodoo. They do practice animal sacrifice. They're not opposed to sacrificing cats and dogs. So to claim that they're not doing it is just ignorant.
Well, are you
Because
saying
it's
they're like going to a pet
it's
store
likely happening, but it's a
Mhm.
situation that's created by the government not providing them what they need to practice their religion.
Well, I mean, are you saying they're going to a pet store and buying these cats and dogs? I mean, I have no idea. I mean, how this is going
No,
to
they are literally
manifest itself.
gathering animals that they believe to be strays.
Mhm.
They're catching chickens, ducks, geese at the community parks
Mhm.
where there are signs posted that you can't take them. Like it is happening. And what I think sad is the Haitians are being vilified because I'm not saying that they don't have a right to practice their religion. They do. But again, it comes down to the reason why we're supposed to have an orderly immigration process is if we had an ordered process for these people coming in, then we could have worked out with farmers to provide the animals that these people need for the religious practices.
But Haitians have been coming here for years. We're just talking about this current group.
Not
Haitians have been living in
500,000 in
Florida
2
for
years.
Yeah, they've been living in Florida for years. There's been plenty
Absolutely.
of Haitians that come to this country.
And there have been cases that have gone to the Supreme Court from both New York, New Jersey, and Florida, and the right is protected.
But the point
Okay.
is, though, they're just suddenly being discovered, is what it means, like as a political point now.
Right,
by,
because they
Trump
threw
and Vance.
20,000 of them in a town of 40,000 people. Okay. Now, so my last question on immigration, since you support immigration, they should be able to go wherever they want, whether they have a right to it or not by law. How many illegal immigrants are living in your house?
Well, I have none, but none of even.
Okay,
asked-
there we go. So
none have even
that
asked to live
that
here,
should be
though.
your immigration policy. You should
No,
be as
because,
open to illegal immigration as you are to strangers coming in living in your house.
no, because
So
a
we're
country is not a country is not your house. I mean, the point is, though, I believe as a libertarian, people
okay.
should
Then
be
we
able to
don't
live
need a
wherever they want
military
in the
because we
world.
don't need. Then we don't need a military because we don't need to defend our people and we don't need to have borders.
Well, sure, we need a border because
No,
that's why I'm saying we need to have people
you can't say
check
anybody
in.
can come in. You can't
No, they need
say
to check.
anybody can come in and then they. But if they're just running across, then you don't have a checkpoint.
Well, no, well, no, that's the whole point. They should be, if they know that they can be checked in and usually will be allowed in, they will apply legally to come to it. They shouldn't swim across the river. They should come to an actual building that has U.S. government employees in it where they can present their identification, et cetera, et
Factual.
cetera.
So they should have to follow the process, and we should clear all the dockets for the people that came here illegally off the cases by deporting them. And then at that point, you're going to have 9 times more judges available to hear the legal applications to come to this country.
Well,
Once you have control, now once we have the legal applications moving and we've removed the people that are here illegally, then we can look at what's the right flow and we can increase it and decrease it as the economy and the growth of our nation need. But having an untapped flow, you have untapped water, it just floods and kills everybody.
Well, you may have some of the same people involved, like those that got frustrated waiting for their legal immigration application to be approved, might have taken, taken other action because they're
Okay, and if I'm frustrated that I can't find a house, I don't get to break into somebody's house and take it.
Totally different when you're talking about
no, it's not. No, it's not.
I guess we'll have to
We
agree
disagree. We disagree on that, and I have a right to not have like everything driven up because we have artificial demand created. We cannot take in the world's problems without taking care of our own. Now, if you can get this country 100% fixed, where we don't have homelessness, where we don't have starving people, where we don't have veterans waiting months to get stuff, we don't have veterans walking around with duct tape around the joints on their artificial limbs. When we get all that fixed, then we can talk about massively increasing the immigration flow. Our government is not taking care of the people here, and they are giving federal funds, which is illegal. They are giving federal funds to migrants.
Oh, I agree with you on that. I'm a libertarian, not a Democrat. I want them to be able to work from
day
one.
But when you open the border, there is no reasonable expectation that people with no job skills and no education are going to be able to provide for themselves in a first world country, unless they bring it down to a third world country.
Well, they're not. I mean, they're not all in that category. For example, like Venezuelans, for example, are a better educated bunch than some people from other countries.
What percentage?
I don't know percentages on that.
Okay, so you can't make sweeping assertions. Since they began opening up the borders, migrant crime is up, but most of the time they don't document it in the cities that have the worst crime because they're all Democrats. But what we do know is now that the government stopped lying about it, every category of violent crime is up 50%. And what is the consistent thing that's affected the entire country? Immigration. So you can't say that, they commit crimes at lower rates. You don't know who committed the crime if you don't catch him. And in the jurisdictions where they're not even pursuing crime, you can't tell who committed the crime. But what is consistent,
crime is down, not up.
No, violent crime is up. You need to relook at the statistics they released right after the Harris and Trump debate. They released the numbers. Violent crime is up 50%. The reason they were saying that the numbers were down is because they implemented a new reporting system. And so the largest jurisdictions in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Miami, Atlanta, basically every large jurisdiction, it was too complicated for them to report. So they just weren't reporting. So the data was just left out. Justice Department released the real statistics. Murder is up 50%, rape is up 50%, assaults are up 50%, everything is up 50%. Some of them as high as 60 and 70, but the good mean is 50%.
Okay. So again, now we're talking about rival governments having different statistics. So I would definitely
that is the United States. That is the Justice Department editing the numbers once they finally got reporting from all the states that weren't reporting. Now, mind you, what they reported does not count all the crime that they didn't even bother investigating, because if they don't charge somebody, they don't call it a crime. And you know as well as I do, in some of these liberal cities, they're just not charging people for the crimes.
I'm surprised they don't charge, like if there's an arrest or something, or a report of a crime.
We all watch the immigrants getting arrested and released and flipping off the camera on the way out.
Well, that's
So,
if you're talking about
anyways,
it, I mean, different crimes. Like if they're talking, I mean, not just crossing the border crimes, that's one thing. But if you're talking
okay.
about them then committing a
What
different
is the
kind of
United
crime,
States law on immigration?
oh, it goes on for thousands of pages.
If you violate the law, you're deported. Bottom line. If you have 2 misdemeanors, you're deported. 1 felony, you're deported. That's why they're not reporting the migrant crime.
Well, I
Okay.
agree. That's
So, and
very
we
that's a good thing.
actually did kind of talk about violent crime there a little bit. So, what do you think? Because despite your earlier assertion, the actual DOJ statistics say that violent crime is up 50%. We're up 40% on murder, and we're up 60% on rapes. Violent crime. How do we get it under control in the country?
Well, frankly, I would have to see those statistics. I find that a little bit
Okay,
hard
pull
to
it.
believe there.
Okay,
But
so like after this, go and look at it. But okay, so even
one
say
thing
they
is
aren't
though,
up, they're still high when more than 5,000 people a year are being injured or severely severely injured or murdered by violent crime. Obviously, we have a problem. How do we fix it?
we do, and this is a good segue because so much of police resources are dealing with victimless crimes, where there aren't victims like murder victims or rape victims or robbery victims.
What victim
We're talking drug offenses. I'm talking about drug offenses and crimes without victims, where only the government's kind of like a victim. And so much police resources are going to those kind of offenses. In fact, more people are arrested for marijuana offenses still than they are for all other crimes combined. So police
Oh, and I throw
resources are
in there
totally
the fact
diverted.
marijuana. I feel like if you have alcohol legal, you have to have marijuana legal. The
Sure.
only reason marijuana is illegal, for people that don't know, is because the
Uh-huh.
lumber industry wanted to stop the production of hemp.
That's a good point because now there's even hemp homes being built. Instead.
Yeah, now the same hippies killed the lumber industry. So,
Well, hemp is even better because, of course, it's more renewable. You could just keep growing it every year. A tree takes a lot longer than a field of hemp to
yeah, and the way
produce.
you're able to bind, you can make car frames out of hemp fibers that are stronger than
Yeah.
fiberglass. So
And they
yeah,
were showing they were
I
showing some car that Henry Ford built like around 1940 that was all made out of hemp. So yeah, it certainly can be done. It just you're right though. There are a lot of special interests that don't want that to happen because
okay.
you know yeah.
So I want to ask you, do you know the countries that have the lowest rates of drug abuse?
I'm not sure about abuse, but of legal problems with it, Portugal would probably be the best because they have legalized it all, but provided treatment
Oh,
if people are drug addicts and such.
the lowest rates of drug use and abuse.
I would say probably Portugal.
Singapore and Thailand.
Oh, because they're probably executing people for it. Yeah,
If you deal
especially
drugs, you're
Singapore.
executed. People stop dealing drugs.
Well, I'm opposed to the death penalty, so I certainly don't approve of that. But I also believe that adults should be able to use whatever substances they want in their own bodies too. So that's another factor as well. I mean, that's your personal choice. If you want to take drugs,
So
you should be able to take
now,
drugs.
this is where I hate that I come across with liberals on. I believe, sort of, yes.
Hmm.
And here's the sort of. You have a right to do whatever you want to do in your own home where you impact nobody
Yes.
else. The problem is 90% of the drug convictions would still end up being people going to jail because they impact other people through their behavior to feed their addictions. And that's the part that's missed. Now, I'll also point out that this was supposed to be like, as they've legalized marijuana in different states, it was supposed to be an economic equalizer. Then they made the barrier of entry to where minority communities couldn't even get involved. So all you're really doing is you're still having the rich people prey on the poor people.
Yeah, well, that's like the problem with those state laws because again, usually those are in states where Democrats are running the states, and they just they love the regulation and
Yeah,
taxes.
and
And they
they take the taxes and they don't put them to what they say they're supposed to. I would be for, but I would be for legalization if all proceeds that are collected, all with no ability to steal from it, all proceeds to collected from taxes go completely 100% to drug treatment and prevention
yeah,
centers for
yeah.
people that are convicted of crimes where they impede the public in some way.
Well, you're kind of talking about what
Give
they
them
do in
treatment.
Portugal, where the drug abuse is considered a medical issue and not a legal issue. So they have all the drugs are legal, but
Well,
then people who need treatment get treatment and to get off of the drugs. So they don't
but it
consider it
bridges
illegal.
because whether you're addicted to illegal drugs or legal drugs, ultimately, if you can't fund your addiction, you turn to crime,
Oh, exactly.
and
That's why the
that's
drug should be
statistically
available.
proven.
that's why you should be able to get the drugs in a store where there's not criminals running the whole deal. And then
It doesn't make it
dozens
more
of the
affordable. You look at Colorado and the dispensaries, you can still buy weed cheaper than you can buy it in the dispensaries because the
Right.
government gets involved and they take fistfuls and fistfuls. If I
That's right.
go
That's
my,
what
I'm a smoker. If
California.
I go buy cigarettes on an Indian reservation, it costs me $2 a pack. But here in
Yeah.
Arizona, if I go buy them at a store, they're $12 a pack.
Oh yeah, California has, like, for example, has really ridiculous amounts of
Yep.
regulation. That's why libertarians there actually opposed the initiative that legalized marijuana. Unanimously, the executive committee opposed it because they just were so many regulations. They created more crimes than even existed before, and they were gleeful. The people that were wanting to legalize marijuana in California just were gleeful about just how many regulations they were going to impose. So of course, there's still a black market. That's why there should only be the same sales taxes they charge on anything else, and that's about it. Instead of all these extra costs. And anybody should be able to open up a marijuana store the same as they open up a I don't know, a gift shop or something. It's ridiculous.
Okay. So this does kind of actually go into from violent crime, drug policy.
Yeah.
We can segue right into gun policy.
hmm
I'm going to state my position on it because you've got to somehow prove me wrong
hmm
before I'll even accept any argument you have. Gun
Yeah.
policy, the Second Amendment says Congress shall make no law infringing the rights to keep and bear arms, which to me says the NFA is unconstitutional. And what the NFA actually did was make it so rich people can have whatever they want, poor people can't. And all of these bills that restrict so-called assault weapons, which are still just guns that you pull one time, it fires one bullet, but the hyperbole makes it sound like they're machine guns, and they're not,
hmm
because machine guns have been they've been priced out through the regulations. Not that they're illegal. I can still go get a tax stamp and spend $40,000 for a machine gun
hmm
and have a machine gun, which is a much more inaccurate weapon,
hmm
but I could still do it. So they didn't make it legal. They just took it away from poor people.
Right. Well, I
So
agree with you 100% on guns here. I'm definitely pro Second Amendment. I believe that people have the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense, whatever kind of weapon they feel is appropriate. Though I would maybe perhaps limit it to not having indiscriminate weapons, like a nuclear bomb or something. But for any weapon that a person would actually own, like in their
okay,
home,
so
whether it's a
what
pistol
is
or a gun or a
okay,
rifle.
so that did sound funny.
Mhm.
However, what's the likelihood of somebody independently being able to make a nuclear bomb?
Well, let's hope not. Maybe you probably
Okay.
could if Kim Jong Un can
So
make one, but
right.
it's. But the point is, though, people have the right to keep and bear arms. All these laws that stop them are violating their Second Amendment rights, and certainly people have the right to defend themselves.
Yeah, and that's the point. And that one's like it's the biggest sticking point to me because the Second Amendment is written somewhat different than every other bill in the Bill of Rights in that it does not say anything about the citizen's right. It directly dictates what the government and Congress can do, which is you cannot restrict it at all. It leaves no caveats, it leaves no exceptions, it leaves nothing. And the reason they had that in there was in the event that the people have to fight the government, and if the government is restricting your weapons so you couldn't be a danger to them, then they're violating the founding principle of the Second Amendment.
Right, exactly. And then even when they refer to a militia, they're talking about all the adult men. That's like everybody was the militia. So that's not even a limitation right there.
Yeah. In order to maintain a well-regulated militia, what was a militia? We were suddenly at war, so they called up everybody with a gun to come in, gave them
Right.
quick training, and then send them into battle.
Yeah, exactly. And a
That's
well-regulated militia, well-regulated doesn't mean like government regulations. It means like made regular or standardized to make sure every state had a militia like that available
exactly.
for defense, and that would be all the adult men of those communities.
Yeah, and to me, and I think the Supreme Court's upholding of now I believe that states have some different ability to control guns, but every federal firearm law and the existence of the ATF to me is unconstitutional via the Second Amendment.
Oh yeah, the ATF should be a convenience store, not a government agency, as libertarians often say. Whenever they show and then that's one of the worst agencies for like entrapping people and killing people, like for these minor
Waco, Ruby Ridge.
Yeah, and recently the guy that's in charge of the Little Rock, Arkansas airport, apparently they could have just
Yep.
like sent him a note saying, "Why don't you just start obeying the law?" And he'll probably say, "Yeah, okay." Instead, they smashed into his house without warning and killed him. This is like the kind of government agency we don't need. We don't need very many government agencies, but we need some of them less than others. And the ATF is one of the first ones I would get rid of.
Okay. So on the next one, foreign policy,
Mhm.
considering my understanding of the libertarian standpoint on foreign policy, I don't expect this to be a very long one, but what's your take on it?
Well, I believe in non-intervention. I mean, it's always assumed that when something's going on in the world, that the U.S. has to have a position on it, and we have to intervene one way or the other on some side of whatever conflict's going on anywhere in the world. And that just has been a big mistake. I mean, as George Washington said, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. And we sure have a heck of a lot of entangling alliances, that's for sure. And then you don't even have to have an alliance with us to get us involved in these wars. Now, there's two of them right now, obviously, that everyone would be thinking of, be like Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East with Israel and Palestine. And I'll start with the easier one to take a position on these days is with Israel and Palestine, because here the U.S. has been the biggest backer of Israel. And I'm a Jewish American myself. I would love to be able to support Israel, and they really were attacked badly on last October. But I do not believe in over the top, out of proportion, insane levels of indiscriminate self-defense that they've been engaging in Gaza. I mean, they're killing tens
I
of
think I
thousands.
th-
Yeah.
I think that that's a misnomer. I think you're mischaracterizing what's happening there, and it's kind of shameful that you're repeating Hamas talking points, which is what you're doing there.
Well, I certainly
Okay,
don't favor Hamas. That's a difference.
Okay, so if you're attacked, you have to kill the people that are attacking you, and if the person is hiding behind 10 children, it is not your fault. You still need to kill them because they're still shooting rockets at you.
Well,
Okay,
no,
so
see, I
this,
disagree with
so
you on
no,
that.
okay, I don't care if you disagree on this one. Okay, the history is there's no such thing as a Palestinian. There were Philistines, which
Mhm,
existed in what is now the
mhm,
Gaza Strip. Okay,
mhm.
everything else, all those people are Jordanian, Syrian. Okay, so that's what they were. They came in and took it over as Europe vacated it. That is the historical land going back 3,000 years to the Israelis. And they ended up getting Muhammad came through, and like I actually have a video on my channel that goes through the whole history. Okay, but if these are legitimate people with a legitimate claim, please explain to me why none of their Arab neighbors will take a single Palestinian refugee, because they are only terrorists. Now I understand you can say that not the children, but when the children at 5 years old are playing the fun game of stab the Jew, they're radicalized by 5 years old. Okay, so now that's not to say that that means that the kids should be combatants, but when you have every single fighter hiding behind the civilians, you can only get those fighters by killing the civilians, and it's intellectually dishonest to blame Israel, who's defending itself, for killing those civilians when it's the responsibility of the military to come out and fight. Okay,
Well,
so if Hamas wants to be a legitimate organization and the Palestinians want to be a legitimate organization, they need to come out and do things like a nation. And that's not what they are. They are terrorist groups, and they're not even a people. They're not Palestinian people are not a people. They are the remnants of the Jordanians, the Syrians, the Arabs that came into the area in the vacuum created after what? First, you had the Macedonian Empire, and then you had the Roman Empire, and then they just kind of got swamped, and then they got scattered to the winds, and then they were under the control of the Ottoman Empire, and under
mhm.
the Ottoman Empire, they were beginning to get their land back, and that's why the whole idea was for that to be Israel to begin with. Okay, but the Arabs specifically set out to radicalize the Palestinian people to wipe out the Jews. That is the stated purpose of Hamas. Hamas was elected by their people. If you support this, then you are the victim. When you die because they're coming to kill those Hamas members, it is your own fault for electing them. The
Well,
people are not completely free of responsibility for their governments.
Well, there is that. Of course, Hamas is one of those people. If you elect them, you're never having another election. And that's happened in a lot of
Yeah, kind
areas
of like
where
Kamala Harris.
yeah, you elect the wrong people, you never have another election. But half of the Palestinians have been born since then and never had a chance to vote for anybody.
Yeah, and
But
80% of the Palestinians believe that every Jew should be killed. 70% of Palestinians believe in suicide bombing.
well, that's also possible. But I still believe in the inherent value of each individual person, and that's why I don't
So
believe in
I
collateral
do I
damage. I
do
don't believe in
too. And
collateral damage. It's mass murder to me by
okay,
war criminals. If you
that's
kill
great. And
collateral,
how do you stop war? You make it so gruesome they never want to engage in war again.
never stopped anybody else. They just keep doing it all over the
I think
world.
Germany got the point after the second time, and so did Japan.
Well, luckily they became part of the world community. That's true. After that, and to be rebuilt by U.S. taxpayer money and everything, and they became westernized and such.
Yeah.
Well,
So
Japanese, Germany was westernized.
okay, and so the reality is, if you want to talk about who these people are, they're the same people that are Hezbollah in Lebanon. And what's the history of Lebanon? You had a Christian country. It was a separate country because of the fact that they were Christian. So they separated it out from Syria because they would have been in the same country, but France, as they were doing the partitioning, they said, okay, we can't have all the Christians here with Muslims. Why? Because Muslims constantly attack and kill anybody who's not Muslim, because the Quran says people that are not Muslim deserve death or slavery or conversion. That's the Quran. There's no such thing as a radical Islamist. It's orthodoxy.
There's also dhimmis, or where they pay the tax. If they're people of the book, they can pay the tax to live peacefully under the Islamic regimes. If you're a Christian or a Jew,
yeah, but that's financial subjugation.
Yeah.
It's still slavery. Okay, but that is who these people are. Okay, now here's the deal. If Hamas was actually legitimate, they'd come out, they'd fight the war, they'd lose, they're done, they're disbanded, but they're not going to. They are hiding behind their people. Their own leaders say, our people are wonderful. They make great human shields. And then you guys vilify them because they get killed. Israel does not have a choice. They persecute their wars as more efficiently than any other people. Okay. And war is always ugly. It's supposed to be ugly, and it shouldn't happen. Okay. But once you go in and your stated purpose is, I'm going to kill every one of you. The only response that Israel has, and if they had been allowed to do this 50 years ago, to just keep pounding the hell out of anybody who said they don't have a right to exist, it would be done by now. But what do we do? No. Every day since 1978, rockets have hit civilian areas of Israel. The fact that they're good at defense and good at pitting their people in shelters does not make it okay and mean that they have to restrain themselves when the other people go overboard. One single rocket into their sovereign territory is a violation and an act of war, and they have the right to do anything they can to invade the war. Now, that being said, it's not our war. Ukraine's not our war. I've been to Ukraine. I've been to Russia. I lived in Moscow. I stayed in Kiev for a long time. Okay. Putin's viewpoint on that war? Ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? Because he says, oh, Ukraine was part of Russia. No, actually, Russia was born from Ukraine. And if he wanted to go to historical precedent, then Crimea should be returned to the Crimean Tatars, who they forcibly moved to Izhevsk in Udmurtia. The whole entire eastern part of Russia should be returned to Mongolia. The entire western part of the country should be returned to Ukraine and the Polish Empire. And then there is no more Russia.
Right. So they just use whatever, any excuse will serve a tyrant, as Aesop even said in one of his fables. Anything that serves his view that he's just wants to win this war is going to serve Putin's needs. But obviously there was a trigger.
But we started that war in Ukraine.
Yeah, of course, by not saying that Ukraine should not be joining NATO. That was the main thing that broke the straw that broke the camel's back, because they certainly should not be part of NATO. And back in the 90s, Clinton even promised Yeltsin that NATO would not start expanding into the former Eastern Bloc. And that was pretty much the agreement. But no, every Eastern European country's in NATO now, and it's like does no other country besides the U.S. have the right to a sphere of influence or to defend themselves or whatever? I mean, that
being said, we along with Russia had a treaty obligation.
Yeah.
That if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons,
Right.
that we would defend their territorial integrity. So the way that
And
should have
they'd
happened,
be a neutral
the
country.
minute Russia invaded,
Mhm.
they were in violation. Our treaty obligation was to go in and push Russia out before it could get into the quagmire it is now, or return nuclear status to Ukraine. If we had done either of those things, we wouldn't be dealing with it now, and we wouldn't have spent $200 billion there.
Well, of course, the U.S. should not be never should be sending U.S. troops overseas. And if you're talking about sending
Uh,
U.S. troops, that's certainly nothing that we should ever do. And in fact,
we
U.S.
have a
troops,
treaty obligation to do so.
well, U.S. troops and Russian troops should never meet each other in battle because the nuclear
Yep.
war is probably going to result from that. And
I understand.
we have to do whatever we can to prevent a nuclear war, of course, because
Yeah.
that's could destroy mankind.
Which pushing another country's red lines is pretty clear.
Yeah, it is. It is. And even though
Russia showed what they were going to do when they pushed for Georgia to be part of NATO, and the U.S. didn't take the hint. Now, I do disagree about having the treaties and organizations and whatnot. To the effect that you kind of gotta not start something.
Oh, right. But we shouldn't be obligating ourselves to defend just about all, large numbers of countries, and because
And the idea of promoting democracy, there's no country we've ever promoted democracy in that's actually ended up a democracy. And we're not a democracy.
No, it's just aligning ourselves with existing democracies is about all we can do. It's very hard to create a new one, that's for sure.
Yeah, because you have to get to that point through your own societal evolution. If the society hasn't gone to that evolution, what you're going to do is have that government collapse and create a power vacuum. And who gets the power vacuum? Usually the most awful and brutal person.
Exactly. That's one of the problems with the anarchy.
As seen in Iran, Iraq. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tempting to not believe in any governments, but if you don't have one, exactly that's going to happen. The worst warlord will just slip in there and take over for everybody. So, yeah, you have to have certainly a strong defense against people like that.
Yep. So with your non-interventionist stance, I to somewhat degree, but on the part of Israel, we should by all means sell them whatever they need for their defense, because they, like any nation, have the right to their defense. And we don't really if you're not going to be involved in foreign policy, if you're not going to go fix the problem, shut up about it. Okay?
Well,
because if hundreds of rockets started coming across our southern border every single day, we would be adding 54 states to the United States, and the United States of America would extend all the way down to the southern border of what's now Mexico.
Yeah, they actually had a chance to do that after the Mexican War, after the
but you get my point.
Yeah.
Okay,
but,
every single day for 70 years, they have been hit by rockets from their neighbors, and we always tell them practice restraint. No. Now, do we have the obligation to pay for them? I think there's some moral obligation, but that's mostly on Europe. Primarily on Italy. They're the ones that routed them from their homes to begin with and created the situation.
Italy? Wasn't it
the Roman Empire?
Oh, the Roman Empire. Yeah, you're going back a ways on that one. More recently, it was like the British and the French were involved over there in the Middle East.
But it was the Europeans, and the recreation of Israel probably would have been a lot slower and a lot more palatable if we hadn't forced the issue after we ignored the slaughter of millions of Jews.
Right, exactly. Not allowing Jews from Europe to come here in the late 30s to get away from Nazi Germany because of the strict immigration laws. Back to that. They should have been admitted. There's a whole ship full.
We need to be honest that the attitudes around the world were very anti-Semitic, and nobody really cared if bad things were happening to Jews. That's what really happened.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, FDR was very anti-Semitic. There's no doubt about that. Sort of like in a gentlemanly way, like all these aristocrats were in the country back then. Yeah, and it's just a shame. Yeah, I remember that ship that was like going around with all the Jewish refugees on it. The only country that took some of them was the Dominican Republic, of all places, because they had just lost a lot of Haitian laborers apparently that were thrown out, and they needed to replace them. So they accepted a small number of the Jews to be laborers. of course, it would have been smart of them to take all of them, but they were the only ones willing to take anybody. And that wasn't just the U.S. You're right. There's anti-Semitism everywhere, with tinged with the economic situation where it was still the Great Depression. People were saying, "Nope, we got enough problems already." So it was just a confluence of forces there that were just disgraceful for how Jews were treated.
Absolutely. So, which again, kind of a perfect segue in the racial and ethnic inequality of the country.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's there's always in just about every country there's like a dominant, dominant ethnicity or a dominant religion or both, and the key is about whether people are tolerant of differences or not, or just consider the other person the other to be either discriminated against or shunned or just various ways of dealing with
Yeah,
it.
and I would say that it's not even perception. So I on this, I just want to point out one point, because it's really hard to make any sort of policy on racial and ethnic inequality, because you can't make a law about race without being racist.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just point out my stance on this one. The majority of the populations that say that they experience discrimination live in Democrat areas, who are the ones who are saying that there's racial discrimination.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, that's where they get
All
more people
all
to
of our
listen to them,
political
perhaps.
activists
That's
come from all the big cities, and all the big cities are
Yeah.
run by Democrats.
Yeah.
All these super woke companies that are saying it's a problem, they're all run by Democrats. So if there's all
Yeah.
this racism,
Yeah.
maybe we just need to keep preaching that the Democrats need to do some soul searching about their racism.
Well, maybe so. They also are the ones that maybe listen to it more or give more credence to some of it. I'm not sure about that, but or establish policies to quote unquote do something about it. Whenever government tries to do something about something, it usually makes the problem worse. If there even was a problem to begin with, they often create the problems that they want to have the solutions to in order to have more government. I mean, that's
Yeah, there's one predictor to intergeneration wealth creation, and that's a two-parent family. And Lyndon Baines Johnson, who is a devout racist, who literally said, if I get this bill passed, I will have these inwards voting Democrat for 200 years. And he's about what, 70, 80 years into it.
Yeah,
So
he
far,
was
he's right.
He lost the Southern whites though eventually.
And what did he do? He took the blacks were succeeding under Jim Crow and segregation laws when they had an 80% two-family home rate or two-parent family home rate, and they're now struggling and falling in deeper and deeper into poverty now that they have a 20% two-family rate. And I think everything that we have as far as racial and ethnic inequity or inequality, it comes down to cultural issues and the fact that we allow the other side to try and claim that it's racist when we point out that this is a cultural problem and not a racism problem.
Right. Well, that's probably true. There's like some of the same cultural problems in based on poverty versus what race we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah,
you go
and look at African immigrants, and they're one of the most successful groups because they're hardworking. They believe in working hard, doing well in school.
Oh, yeah.
Having your families all together. They'll have extended families living all together to help build wealth for the family going forward.
Right, exactly.
And that entire group is all black. So obviously it's not racism against black people. It's not racism against non-white people when the next two highest performing groups are Asians and Central Asians, like Indians.
Indians, yeah.
So like the most successful groups in this country are not white, but what is consistent is if you compare the two-parent families to the economic and educational and wealth building successes, the only statistic that's 100% correlationary is two-parent families.
Oh, that's definitely a big help, because that's one before anything else, you're going to have economic problems if you don't have like especially if you have like a single parent. You're not going to have the kind of economic strength you would have with a full bore family, mother, father, and all that, an intact household. And the first thing is economic. You're going to have a poor, and poverty is going to result, and that leads to some of the other problems, where people just don't have enough resources to maybe have the best food or the best nutrition. And there's just one thing just leads to another, and they're more concerned with having to scrape and scrimp to make a living than they are about reading or about educating themselves and all that. So yeah, one thing just leads to another on the poverty aspect more than anything.
Yeah. Since I'm going to do kind of a circular tie-in here. The way a lot of the immigrant families end up succeeding is because they have these huge families that all work together for the betterment of the family. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But in the African American community, 70 years ago, they were 14% of the population. They're down to about 11%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So why is that? Okay. Now this is going to hit on another thing that you said, woman's right to choose, and you're not going to like it. But I'm going to throw up some facts here, and hopefully you just consider it and how it has its racial impacts.
Mm-hmm.
Birth control and abortion was created by Margaret Sanger,
yes,
who was a eugenicist. She did not believe black and brown people with melanin, should be allowed to breed.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
She founded Planned Parenthood, who performs 95% of the abortions in this country. Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
Okay. And where are 95% of Planned Parenthood's locations?
That I'm not sure.
Black and brown communities. Okay. So if you break down the statistics, the majority of the abortions being performed are among black and brown people. And the estimates say if it hadn't been for Roe v. Wade and abortion had been much more restricted as it was prior to Roe v. Wade, there would be an additional 30 to 40 million African Americans. And then you would have a community that as a voting bloc would be almost 25% of the country. And they would have had those larger families working together to lift up their families.
Well, except that often the people that have abortions are ones that cannot support their children and know it.
Do you have children? Do you have children, Ted?
Yes, I have an adult daughter.
Okay. Can you ever afford children? Not really.
We could afford the one child. Yeah.
You figure it out.
First, yeah, it was tough at first.
It's ridiculous no matter what. You figure it out. And the same thing happens. Everybody figures it out, especially if you have two parents. So I think those are the two biggest issues as far as racial equity. We allow a program that was literally built to kill black and brown people and get them to do it themselves, combined with policies that make sure they break up black and brown families.
Well, those were the welfare policies that did that. I mean, it's
the welfare policies and the abortion policy. The whole creation of abortion had one goal, and that was to keep black and brown people from breeding, and that's the effect that it's having.
Well, there are plenty of white people that take advantage of that also. Yeah.
Well, I understand, but then you talk about like wars and collateral damage. To me, abortion was a way of getting black people and brown people to kill themselves, and yeah, some white people are doing it too, but it's primarily been effective because over 80% of abortions impact black and brown people.
Did you ever read the book Freakonomics a while back? These economists had like counterintuitive kind of economic results. They were talking about Roe v. Wade and the legalizing abortion. And they were saying that because of all those babies not being born, that was why the crime rate started going down in the 1990s and continued to go down for quite a while after that. Because they weren't born and into the families where they would not be wanted and they'd be maltreated and maybe become criminals. That was their theory. Okay. In that book.
And their argument was killing black babies stops crime. And
well, they were talking about poverty.
But you can step around the results, but the results are the results. Mm-hmm. So, but what also happened at almost the exact same time as Roe v. Wade was the expansion of the welfare system. So when a community has a population collapse, their economic prospects go down because they have a shrinking market.
Yeah.
So now they may have their own culture, but they're not going to be able to cross into other cultures quite as much. I mean, there's exceptions to that. Obviously, Oprah Winfrey is a great example. She obviously appeals to people of all, but there are also cultural things. But when you start shrinking the culture, which is what's happening to the black community, is it's shrinking, and instead of expanding, you restrict the growth. And it's the same thing with the country. Yes, our country needs to keep growing so we can keep expanding and keep improving things, but the opposite thing has happened. And to me, the serious look, and it comes from the racial and ethnic inequality, it comes right in with abortion, because I don't know how you can be supportive of a policy that was literally created to kill black and brown babies when that has actually been the result, and call it choice.
Well, it's interesting you're saying that Margaret Sanger, I mean, she might have advocated that, but it was really birth control at that time that she was like pushing for people. Abortion was illegal until everywhere until like 1967. I think some states started legalizing it then. So there was a big gap in time there. It was the birth control part that Margaret
Yeah,
Sanger was
but
mostly responsible for.
yeah, but when she spoke on that, she also talked about abortion and terminating pregnancies, including the Irma remedies and whatnot that could help terminate a pregnancy.
Yeah, but legally back then,
But she didn't want
birth
it.
control ahead of time would be the what she was really trying to get to.
Yeah, but again, the goal of her reproductive rights movement was actually not so much about rights. It was about keeping these people and giving them every reason, like, oh, it's tough, it's economically impossible, blah blah blah. So you shouldn't have kids. But we all know that, like, some of the poorest families turn out some of the biggest, most successful families, even though they're impoverished at the start, because they all come together, work together, and advance the whole group.
Well, they do. It seems like it's the
Chinese
people
that
go big on that for everybody relying together and lending each other money and to buy businesses, things like that.
Exactly. And in our society, we have a way of trying to incentivize behavior that we know is wrong, telling you how it's going to benefit you, even when you should know counterintuitively it's bad for you.
Oh yeah, well, it's whatever usually serves the powers that be.
Yeah, exactly. And the powers that be at the time that pushed all of these policies, we have to remember, were the Democrat Party, who had slaves. As soon as they managed to assassinate Lincoln, tried to reinstitute slavery. They then tried to deny slaves rights. They tried to say that they weren't an entire person, all the way up until the 60s, and not a single Democrat voting for civil rights, trying to enforce segregation, Jim Crow. And at the same time that they're doing segregation and Jim Crow and trying to block the civil rights movement, they put forward birth control and abortion to keep black and brown people from breeding. And I think we can't like talk about the policy without ignoring the fact that the whole concept, the whole argument, the whole debate about it being a woman's right was come up with by people who only said that because they wanted black and brown people to kill their own babies.
Well, whatever their motivation of that, and that's a terrible motivation, it still doesn't negate that people do have rights to their body and to their personal liberties and such.
Okay. So, and I think I can't really tell. I think you're a little bit older than me.
Yeah,
when did it go from abortion is bad and should be safe, legal, and rare, i.e., when we had 10,000 abortions a year, to now everyone should be able to get an abortion as easily as possible, to where we're aborting over 1 million babies a year?
Except that it's easier to get birth control now, but some Republicans actually want to stop that. They want to limit birth control, which would be terrible.
No, they want to limit mifepristone. They want to limit the abortion drugs.
Well, certainly they want to do that, but I'm talking about there's some elements that do want to not let people get actual contraception when it really should be available over the counter, so people can much more easily take it.
To me, that's a non-starter, because that's religious beliefs, and you don't get to protrude your religious beliefs on other people, and that would be the government getting involved in controlling.
Right, exactly, and
my stance is you still speak for the people without the voice. And yeah. And considering who it targeted, and the fact that it's to this day continuing to target, I still think even calling it a women's rights issue, it's a right. It's still effectively a way for black women to murder their own babies, as it was intended, pushed by the party who intended it for black and brown people to kill their own babies.
Well, alternatively, one thing that could be done is to have like an advertising campaign about how good it is to give your baby up for adoption, and all these people that want babies.
Absolutely,
But culturally, nobody
absolutely.
seems to want to give up their babies for adoption. No culture,
Yeah,
white,
and
black,
yet there's three
Hispanic,
million.
nobody
There's
wants
three
to. Yeah,
million. There's
yeah.
3 million families waiting to adopt babies, and 1 million babies a year aborted. So these aren't unwanted babies.
Yeah,
They're
if there was a
just
way to do that, that's
yeah.
wonderful. We need to have more babies available to adopt.
We
That's it's
we
just a
we
taboo
we
of some
we
kind.
might
Yeah.
we might stop. We might start by stopping people and arresting people and prosecuting people that firebomb pro-life clinics that do exactly that kind of work.
Well, certainly, I don't object to people protesting at abortion clinics. Yeah,
Firebombing. They
I don't. I don't
firebomb.
think.
They
I think you shouldn't be doing that.
firebomb.
Yeah, you shouldn't be
Yeah, they
doing that.
firebomb the life centers, and you don't hear any news about it. You don't hear a single conservative or libertarian talk about that these people who are just trying to keep babies alive and find them new homes if they're unwanted, or give women the resources to get by if they're in a challenging situation
Oh yeah, I'm
without
aware.
having to resort to abortion, and yet
Right.
they're the ones being firebombed, not abortion clinics.
Yeah, I'm aware of the folks that go to the abortion clinics and hand out flyers. Here's your options and all that. That's perfectly fine. They have every right to do that, and they should.
Well, but
Yeah.
but you're completely glassing over the fact that abortion activists, pro-abortion activists, are firebombing the buildings of people who
Oh,
are
okay. I wasn't clear on what
pro-life.
you were talking about there. I wasn't aware
Yeah,
that that was going on. Okay, or that there were
yeah,
places where you could go to have the alternative
yep,
information. I didn't even know there were places like that. So.
yep. Motherhood care centers is one of the many terms for them, but they're all over the place. There's one about
All right.
a mile from my house in a town of 252 people.
Okay, well, I guess by me not knowing there was such a place, I didn't know anybody was attacking them. That's not
Yeah,
definitely not in the news there. That's news to me.
yeah.
I will look that
So
up. I can believe that.
and they talk about violent extremist acts, and yet something like that,
Right,
they're giving them information, giving them resources, giving them options, and they're the ones
right.
being firebombed, whereas the ones that literally push abortion.
Hmm. Right. Well, I absolutely believe in free speech and the First Amendment, and I oppose people violating the rights of those that are performing First Amendment rights. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that would certainly violate liberty in many, many different ways, which you're describing.
Mm. All right, so we've actually I thought we'd fit under an hour. We've actually been more than that, so I kind of want to wrap
Okay.
it up here.
Sure.
For the viewers, and I know we've had a couple people at least. Some of the channels, when I put it up there, I can't even see if they're watching. It doesn't feed through on the streaming service.
Okay.
But we do have at least some people have been watching us this whole time.
Oh,
Again, this
great.
is Ted. This is Ted Brown, the candidate for the Texas Senate, looking to be an alternative from Ted Cruz, who's the most non-Republican Republican I've ever seen in my life, and Colin Allred, who's the most communist congressional candidate I've ever seen in my life. So I'd love to see a different option going in there. I do appreciate Ted joining me, and there's actually a couple of write-in candidates in the same race that I'm also going to be interviewing, one later today and one later in the week. So again, Ted, thank you so much. Before we go, any last things that you want to say to anybody who sees this or sees the clips?
Well, sure. Well, Rob, thanks again for having me. And if anyone wants to check out my website, it's tedbrown.org. And you can find me on Twitter X at Ted Brown Liberty. And on Facebook, it's Ted Brown, Libertarian for U.S. Senator from Texas. So, yeah, we just, the voters need an alternative, like Rob said. And I'm the other one on the ballot there in the Texas Senate race. I'm the only totally independent candidate, not beholden to any special interest groups. So please support me in the upcoming election.
Yep, and I would add to that for my viewers, if you don't know much about the Libertarian Party, go to the Libertarian website as well and make sure to look at it. We've got a presidential candidate, we've got candidates in races all over the country. So even if you're not in Texas and able to vote on his race, there are good libertarian candidates out there all around the country, and we do need to get some other options up there and available. And I tend to find that people who actually learn about the Libertarian Party, libertarians, I think, tend to cover the beliefs of more of the population than either the Democrats or the Republicans. We just kind of have a messaging issue, so go find out about it, share it with your friends, and you all thanks for joining us, and have a great evening. Thanks again, Ted.
Thanks a lot.